Most people walked right past Mr. Dalton without a second thought. He was the janitor at Graybridge High School, a quiet man in his early 60s who wore the same faded blue jumpsuit every day and spoke only when spoken to. To the students, he was invisible at best and the target of jokes at worst. They mocked his outdated cassette player, his odd routines, his complete disinterest in conversation. Some even whispered that he slept in the boiler room. No one imagined he had a life beyond those cold linoleum hallways. But what the school didn't know, what no one even suspected, was that Mr. Dalton carried a secret. One that would shatter the school's calm surface and leave a community asking how they had never seen it coming. Dalton kept to a precise routine. He arrived before sunrise and left after dark. His presence marked by the faint scent of cleaning fluid and the steady rhythm of a mop on tile. He seemed to glide through the halls, always working, never watching. But he noticed everything. Students believed he wasn't listening when they gossiped or passed answers during exams. Teachers assumed he wasn't paying attention during their staff room conversations. In truth, Mr. Dalton was observant to a degree that bordered on unnerving. His faded blue eyes missed nothing, though he gave no sign of judgment. He simply listened, watched, and waited. Over time, he had collected more information about the school than even the principal and invisible archive stored quietly in his mind. The first whisper of trouble began not with Dalton, but with a sophomore named Kayla Monroe, Strata. Student and track star, Kayla vanished one Monday morning on her way to school. Her parents called the police immediately, but there were no signs of struggle, no messages, no clues. The school was thrown into a state of fear and confusion. Rumors spread like wildfire, some blaming Kayla's boyfriend, others suggesting she had run away. Few took the time to remember that Dalton had been the last one to see her. He had unlocked the front doors at 6:30 a.m. and saw Kayla step inside moments later. But no one thought to ask him what he saw. After all, he was just the janitor. By Thursday, the police had combed through every inch of the school, interviewed dozens of students and faculty, and found nothing. That morning, 2 officers arrived again, this time with a warrant. Their destination wasn't Kayla's locker or the teacher's lounge. It was the janitor's office. The hallway grew silent as whispers erupted among the students. Mr. Dalton stood there, silent as always, watching the officers with calm detachment. No one expected what came next. Behind that dented metal door labeled Custodian, the police found something they could not explain. Maps, photos, student schedules, journals cataloging years of behavior patterns, interactions, suspicions. Everything was dated, labeled, and neatly organized. It looked less like a janitor's supply closet and more like a private investigator's command center. The news exploded across town within hours. Parents demanded answers. The media circled like vultures. Was Mr. Dalton stalking students? Was he involved in Kayla's disappearance? Or was he trying to protect them from something no one else could see? Suddenly, the jokes stopped. No one laughed at the janitor anymore. The students who had once thrown paper at his feet or mocked his silence now watched news reports with wide eyes and growing fear. What had he been doing all these years, hiding behind his mop and gloves? The school that once ignored him now couldn't look away. And while Mr. Dalton sat in a windowless room at the local precinct, speaking softly into a recorder, investigators began to piece together a story that would haunt Graybridge High for years to come. The police weren't sure what they had found. In Mr. Dalton's office, it wasn't illegal at least not obviously. There were no weapons, no drugs, no direct evidence linking him to Kayla's disappearance. But what disturbed them was the intent. Every item was meticulously labeled. Photographs of students walking to class, diagrams of hallway traffic at various times of day, printouts from old school newsletters, pages from yearbooks with red circles, and marginal notes. On one wall hung a large corkboard filled with pins and string in old cliché that felt suddenly real. It didn't paint a clear picture, but it told the officers one thing: this man had been watching for years, and not casually, obsessively. Detectives questioned Dalton for hours, asking the same things in different ways. Why did he keep these records? What did the notes mean? Where was Kayla Monroe? Dalton answered with calm clarity, never raising his voice. I noticed patterns, he said. I paid attention. No one else did. He explained that he had seen things over the years, small things most people overlooked. A student crying every day at the same bench. A teacher meeting certain students behind closed doors too often. A counselor deleting attendance logs. Something was wrong here, he repeated. I didn't know what, so I documented everything. The detectives didn't know what to do with that. His behavior was strange, deeply so, but not criminal. Back at the school, speculation ran wild. Some believed Dalton was a hero, a man who saw what no one else dared to see. Others believed he was a predator who had finally slipped up. Administration released a vague statement emphasizing cooperation with law enforcement and concern for student safety. But the truth was, they were panicking. No one had ever thought to monitor the janitor. He passed every background check, never caused a scene, never gave anyone a reason to worry. And now they were being forced to ask themselves, how much did we really know about the man who walked our halls every single day? The deeper investigators dug, the more confusing things became. The journals found in Dalton's office went back over 10 years. Each entry was written in block letters, dated and signed with his initials. He wrote about fights in the parking lot that were never reported, about teachers who suddenly left mid-year without explanation. He described students exchanging envelopes, coded messages etched into textbooks, strange men sitting in parked cars near the school. The entries weren't wild theories. They were clinical, almost detached. The tone was more scientific than emotional, but one detail repeated throughout the pages: watch Kayla. That was the phrase that caught the detective's eye. Watch Kayla. It appeared first nearly 2 years ago, when Kayla was just a freshman. Dalton had noticed something about her early on. She stayed late almost every day, but never for clubs or sports. Her schedule said she left at 3:15, but Dalton's notes claimed she was routinely seen at the East Wing entrance as late as 6:30 p.m. He wrote that she often looked nervous when she left, always checking over her shoulder. He also noted interactions between Kayla and Mr. Alder, the computer science teacher meetings that occurred behind closed doors with no one else present. The school dismissed these observations as speculation, but detectives saw the beginnings of a pattern. They brought Mr. Alder in for questioning. He seemed caught off guard, but cooperative. He claimed Kayla had been helping with the school's robotics club, which often stayed after hours. There was nothing inappropriate, he insisted. We were working on a drone project. She was bright, ambitious. But when asked why no records of the club's meetings existed, Alder grew tense. It was informal, he said. Off the books. Detectives left with more questions than answers. Something didn't feel right, and now Dalton's obsessive note-taking looked less like madness and more like foresight. Meanwhile, Dalton remained in custody, though he wasn't under arrest. He never asked for a lawyer. He ate his meals in silence, slept in the chair provided, and cooperated with every request. I've done nothing wrong, he said, more than once. But I've seen wrong done. Forensic analysts continued reviewing the contents of his office. Among the items was an old USB drive tucked into the binding of one of his journals. It contained folders labeled by year, each filled with scanned documents, emails, and surveillance footage. Where had he gotten these files? Who gave them to him? Or had he taken them himself? Some videos showed Kayla in the hallways, Others showed her arguing with Mr. Alder in the parking lot. One clip showed her slipping a sealed envelope into a locker that wasn't hers. That locker belonged to another student, Josh Elisa Sr., who had been expelled abruptly 6 months earlier for disciplinary reasons. Dalton had documented the incident extensively, noting that Josh's expulsion followed a private meeting with the principal, after which no explanation was given. Dalton believed Josh had discovered something he wasn't supposed to know, and Kayla somehow had picked up the trail. The envelope, of course, was gone. The locker had been cleaned out long ago. But when officers tracked down Josh, now working part-time at a gas station 2 towns over, he hesitated before answering their questions. "I thought this was over," he said. "I didn't want trouble." Eventually, he admitted that Kayla had come to him asking questions about money moving through the school, about backdoor deals, about staff who got paid for programs that didn't exist. He'd seen some files on the principal's computer, transfers that didn't add up. He was told to stay quiet or lose his chance to graduate. Then, suddenly, he was expelled. Kayla wasn't scared, Josh added. She was angry. The picture was starting to take shape. Dalton hadn't just been documenting gossip or petty infractions. He'd been building a case, one piece at a time, against something far bigger than anyone imagined. His files indicated a possible embezzlement scheme, involving several staff members and siphoning school funds into fake programs. It appeared Kayla had stumbled onto it possibly through a tech glitch or an overlooked folder on a shared computer and started connecting dots. Dalton, always watching, noticed her behavior shift and began focusing his attention on her. Sensing she was on the edge of uncovering something, detectives now had a motive not for Dalton, but for someone else. The theory was chilling. Kayla discovered something incriminating, confided in someone perhaps even Dalton and was silenced before she could expose it. The problem was proving it. Without a body, without a confession, and with only circumstantial digital evidence, the case remained tenuous. But it was clear to investigators that Dalton, far from being the villain, had been the school's silent sentinel. His eccentric habits, once mocked, had become invaluable. And as the town held its breath, the mystery of Kayla's disappearance began shifting from a tragedy to a potential conspiracy. The media narrative changed almost overnight. Where headlines once read "Creepy Janitor's Secret Files Discovered," they now shifted to "Janitor" or "Whistleblower." Parents who once feared Dalton now demanded accountability from the school administration. News vans parked outside the building. The principal refused interviews. Mr. Alder was placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. The community, shocked and divided, awaited the truth. But through it all, Dalton remained calm. "I didn't know what would happen," he said during his final interview that week. "But I knew something would, and I needed to be ready." As pressure mounted, a breakthrough finally came. One of the surveillance clips on Dalton's USB showed Kayla in the school basement restricted maintenance area few students knew existed. The timestamp matched the morning she disappeared. She entered at 6:47 a.m. and was never seen exiting. Investigators revisited the basement with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. Behind a wall panel, they found a narrow passageway leading to an old storage room sealed off decades earlier. Inside, they discovered Kayla's backpack, her phone still containing unuploaded voice memos, and a discarded school-issued laptop. The room showed no signs of struggle, but forensic evidence confirmed Kayla had been there. What happened next remained unclear. The laptop, when examined, revealed fragments of file spreadsheets, emails, and budget records matching Dalton's suspicions. One corrupted file, partially recoverable, included a list of staff names linked to fund transfers. Among them, the principal, 2 administrators, and Mr. Alder. With this, the case took on a new urgency. The FBI was brought in to assist. Federal charges were now on the table. And in the middle of it all was the janitor they had all once laughed at. Dalton was released from custody with a quiet apology. The community greeted him with silence. No cheering crowds, no public vindication. Just uneasy respect. He returned to his modest apartment where he resumed his routines with the same quiet diligence as before. He refused interviews, declined offers from news outlets and book publishers. When asked why he had done all this, why he had spent years quietly recording the shadows of Graybridge High, his answer was simple: because someone had to. And for the first time in years, no one dared to laugh. In the months following Dalton's release, Graybridge High tried to return to normal. Students still filed into classrooms, the bell still rang at 8 a.m., and the same morning announcements echoed through the halls. But the air had changed. Teachers spoke in hushed tones, parents scrutinized staff rosters, and where once students joked about the janitor, now they lowered their voices at the mere mention of his name. Mr. Dalton hadn't returned to work. The school said he was on extended leave. But everyone knew he wasn't coming back, not after. What had happened, not after what had been uncovered. The investigation had grown into something larger than anyone expected. Federal prosecutors now pursued charges against multiple school officials, including embezzlement, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Mr. Alder, who had denied any wrongdoing, was arrested after encrypted messages surfaced communications, implicating him in manipulating school records and threatening students who got too close to the truth. The principal resigned in disgrace, followed by 2 senior administrators. Dozens of interviews, audits, and forensic examinations followed. In the eye of that storm sat Mr. Dalton's archive, quiet, methodical, irrefutable. For the public, the most disturbing realization wasn't the crimes themselves, but how easily they had gone unnoticed. Year after year, funds disappeared. Programs were listed on paper, but never existed in practice. Teachers were pressured into silence, and students like Kayla were gaslit or pushed out, all while the janitor watched. He hadn't stopped anything directly. He hadn't intervened, but he had built the record. And that record was what brought the entire system to its knees. It begged a question that rippled far beyond Graybridge. How many other schools had their own Daltons, or needed one? Kayla's voice, almost lost to time, finally broke through. Forensic teams recovered several voice memos from her damaged phone. In them, she narrated her suspicions, at first nervously, then with growing certainty. She referenced emails she couldn't trace, documents she copied onto a USB she said she hid someplace safe. She never named Dalton directly, but in one memo, she said, "Someone else knows. I'm not alone in this. I think he's been watching, too." That line became a kind of symbol. Students printed it on shirts. Activists used it in speeches. It came to represent not just Kayla's bravery, but the quiet presence of those who see what others ignore. Despite the national attention, Dalton stayed out of the spotlight. He declined interviews from every major news outlet. A documentary was made without his participation. He lived quietly in the same modest building, tending a small rooftop garden that no one knew he had. Occasionally, students former and current would leave letters by his door. Some apologized, others thanked him. But Dalton never responded. He had done what he came to do. The rest, he believed, belonged to the community. "I'm not the story," he once said to one reporter who caught him on the street. "I just recorded it." What many didn't know was that Dalton had kept one last journal, one not turned over to the authorities. It was found months later, after his passing, by the building's landlord who entered his apartment to check on him. The journal contained no timelines or observations. It was different. It was personal. Handwritten entries reflecting on his years at Graybridge. He wrote of loneliness, of invisibility, of the pain of watching injustice and not being able to stop it directly. But he also wrote about Kayla, how her courage reminded him of why he began keeping notes in the first place. She gave me purpose. Again, one entry read, "She saw the cracks. I just helped her trace them." Dalton's funeral was small by his request. A few neighbors attended and a handful of former students. There were no speeches, no news cameras, no long eulogies. But in the weeks after, a quiet memorial formed outside Graybridge High. Students placed candles, drawings, and notes on the maintenance room door. The very place where, months earlier, police had broken in with suspicion now stood as a symbol of vigilance. The phrase "he saw the cracks" was spray-painted in blue across the sidewalk, accompanied by the names of whistleblowers from other schools who had come forward in the wake of the scandal, because what started at Graybridge didn't stay there. Dalton's story sparked national conversations about accountability in education. Investigations opened in other districts. School boards were forced to implement new transparency protocols. And while Dalton never intended to become a symbol, his name appeared in textbooks, policy documents, and academic papers. He became known not as a janitor, but as a quiet watchdog, someone who understood that the smallest presence could still cast a long shadow. Asterisk, he swept floors. One student wrote online, but he cleaned the system. Years passed. Graybridge was rebuilt, not physically, but structurally. New leadership came in. Policies changed. Students felt safer speaking up. And while the wounds of Kayla's disappearance never fully healed, her body was never found, her legacy lived on in reforms, in awareness, and in those voice memos played each year at the school's remembrance ceremony. And always, in the background, was the memory of a quiet man in a blue jumpsuit, who saw more than anyone thought he should done, cared enough to keep a record. As the years rolled on, former students began to reflect on their own behavior. Many had laughed at Dalton, mocked him, ignored him, treated him as part of the scenery. Now adults, some wrote essays and social media posts filled with regret. "We thought he was strange," one confessed. "We never considered he might be the only adult truly paying attention." Another wrote, "While we were busy pretending we were invincible, he was quietly building the evidence that saved us." The collective shame turned into something more powerful, a renewed vigilance, a determination to never underestimate the quiet ones again. Educational institutions began offering workshops on ethical reporting and whistleblower protection. Some schools even created Dalton protocols, guidelines for internal checks based on his model of observation and record keeping. Ironically, what had once made Dalton seem creepy, his obsessive note-taking, became a case study in ethical documentation. Privacy advocates debated the line between vigilance and surveillance, but most agreed that Dalton had stayed on the right side of it. He never weaponized his knowledge. He never sought power. He simply wanted the truth preserved just in case someone ever cared enough to ask, and someone did. Kayla, she was the catalyst, the spark, the voice that refused to be silenced. Her curiosity lit the path, and Dalton's records cleared them way. Together, though they may not have realized it, they exposed something bigger than either of them. It wasn't just corruption. It was a culture of silence, of complicity, of willful ignorance. Their story, tragic and powerful, became a reminder that change doesn't always come from bold speeches or grand actions. Sometimes it begins with observation, with quiet resistance, with a janitor who took notes while the rest of the world looked away. In the end, the story of Mr. Dalton and Kayla Monroe became a legend, not the kind built on myth, but on quiet, irrefutable truth. It echoed in classrooms and courtrooms, in training sessions and public hearings. But beyond the policies and headlines, it lived in the hearts of those who once saw themselves as powerless. Students, staff, community members, they all learned. A lesson no textbook could teach, that those we overlook are sometimes the ones we most need to see, and that every institution, no matter how polished, must be held to account. Dalton never considered himself a hero. He never sought recognition. He simply saw something wrong and chose not to look away. That choice, small, persistent, deliberate, became a force of change. He didn't wear a badge. He didn't hold a title of authority. But in the end, he did what those in power failed to do. He paid attention. And because of that, a school was forced to confront its darkest truths. A community was forced to change. And a missing girl, though never returned, was never forgotten. So the next time someone passes a janitor in the hallway without a glance, or ignores the quiet man in the corner, perhaps they'll remember this story. Perhaps they'll remember that justice doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes it waits patiently in a supply closet, surrounded by mops and dust, holding a journal no one thought to read until it was too late. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect and then take action. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful true stories that uncover the unseen. Leave a comment below. Have you ever overlooked someone who turned out to be extraordinary? Like the video if you believe that even the quietest voices deserve to be heard, and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that heroes don't always stand in the spotlight. Sometimes they're just quietly doing the right thing when no one else will.